The weeds are the children of the evil one. Surely, each of us has, at least once, struggled with the presence of badness and evil weaving through this life. Why, alongside good and peaceful things, do the shadows of evil also exist? The teaching of Jesus Christ through the parable of the weeds in the wheat field has, in part, illuminated this concern in a way that is very relatable and full of contemplation. Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a master who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. The weeds, initially looking almost identical to the wheat, grew up, intertwined with the good, thriving sprouts. And then Jesus explained clearly, "The weeds are the children of the evil one." This teaching is not for us to hastily judge, or to give ourselves the right to pull up the weeds around us. On the contrary, it is a loving reminder of patience and faith in the righteousness of God. In this life, good and evil coexist, just as wheat and weeds grow together in the same field. There will be pain, injustice, and people who sow division and hatred. But the owner of the field instructed his servants, "Let both grow together until the harvest." This shows the immense mercy of God. He gives everyone, good or bad, the opportunity to live, to repent, to turn back. And in the end, he himself will be the one to judge all things on the last day. As a psalm was written, "Though the wicked sprout like grass, and all evildoers flourish, they are doomed to destruction forever." The Lord's teaching does not sow fear in our hearts, but hope. Hope in a final harvest, where justice will be served, and the golden grains of wheat of the kingdom of heaven will be gathered into the barn. As for our part, let us continue to be good wheat, faithfully reaching for the light and the truth, even though weeds are still present somewhere around us. The Lord's teaching does not just stop at a parable. It opens up a whole sky of deep contemplation about life, about how we perceive ourselves, perceive others, and place our complete trust in God. It is not a dry doctrine, but a cool stream flowing into the soul, helping us find peace amidst the chaos of the world. From the field of that parable, 10 living philosophies sprout, like golden, heavy ears of wheat, full of wisdom. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel if you truly want to hear the teachings of Jesus Christ to change this life. Thank you, and you are invited to listen. 1. In this world, good and evil always exist side by side, and at first glance they often look very similar. Life is not a picture of just black and white. Evil sometimes dons the cloak of kindness, and mistakes can hide behind smiles. Our mission is not to rush to judgment, but to learn how to cultivate goodness right within our own souls. One day, the Apostle Peter saw a notoriously greedy tax collector giving alms to a beggar. He went to ask Jesus, "Teacher, this man is like both good wheat and a weed. So what is he?" Jesus looked at him, his eyes gentle. "Peter, you only see the outward action, but the Father in heaven sees into the heart. In the same field, there are grains of wheat that want to rise, and there are weeds that cling. Do not judge hastily, for only the owner of the field knows what is true wheat until the end of the harvest." 2. The patience of God is a great lesson in tolerance. God does not rush to punish. He lets both the wheat and the weeds receive the same sunlight, the same cool rain. That is the time of grace, the opportunity for lost souls to repent. Let us also learn that patience. Let us not be quick to remove anyone from our lives. When passing through a Samaritan village, the villagers did not welcome Jesus and the disciples. The Apostle John angrily said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Jesus turned and said gently, "John, you do not know what spirit is inciting you. The Son of Man came not to destroy, but to save. The field is still green, the harvest has not yet come. Give the young wheat more time to grow." 3. Hasty judgment by humans can harm the good. Zeal without wisdom can become cruelty. When we give ourselves the right to pull the weeds, it is very likely we will also sever the roots of the fragile wheat growing beside them. Let that discernment be left to the One who sees all things. A woman caught in public sin stood listening to Jesus preach from a distance. The Apostle Andrew said, "Teacher, why do you let such a person near us? She is a weed that defiles the whole field." Jesus replied, "Andrew, if you run to pull up that plant now, how much good wheat around it will you trample? Furthermore, you only see the thorn of today, but I see the rose that may bloom tomorrow. Be careful, lest when you pull the weeds, you uproot the wheat." 4. The most important responsibility of each person is to focus on making themselves good wheat. Instead of wasting time noticing, criticizing, and finding ways to eliminate the weeds around, use all your energy to nourish your own soul. Let faith, love, and humility take deep root and blossom. A field of good, strong wheat will naturally overwhelm the growth of weeds. Martha was busy with preparations, seeing her sister Mary sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to his word. She complained, "Lord, tell my sister to help me." Jesus looked at her tenderly. "Martha, you are worried about too many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better part. Worry about your own wheat bearing heavy grain, instead of being concerned with someone else's plot of land." 5. Ultimate justice belongs to God alone, and he will judge all things at the appointed time. This truth frees us from the burden of hatred and anxiety about the injustices we suffer. Live peacefully and do good, believing that no action, good or bad, is forgotten before the court of the just one. A farmer came to Jesus, his heart full of anger. "Teacher, my enemy has sown weeds in my field. What must I do to punish him?" Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder. "Friend, take care of your wheat. Do not let the weed of hatred grow in your own soul. Trust that at the harvest, the owner of the field will repay each person according to their deeds. Not one stalk of wheat will be missed, and not one weed will be tolerated." 6. Evil is often very subtle. It can imitate the appearance of good to deceive. The greatest danger is not the open enemy, but the silent corruption from within, disguised as righteousness. We need wisdom and God's grace to recognize what is true wheat, bearing humble fruit, and what is the arrogant weed that only has an outward appearance. In the temple, a Pharisee prayed loudly, listing his merits and despising the tax collector, who was beating his breast in the distance. A few disciples secretly admired his piety, but Jesus said to them, "Look at their fruit. A good wheat plant produces the rice of mercy and repentance, but a weed, though it grows tall, only produces empty, arrogant seeds." 7. The presence of evil is sometimes a trial to make goodness stronger and purer. Just as storms make tree roots grip the earth more deeply, the difficulties and injustices in life can forge our faith, make our love stronger, and our choice to follow goodness more resolute. A young woman named Leah cried to Jesus, "Teacher, I try to live lovingly, but those around me always sow evil and mock me. Why doesn't God take them away?" Jesus looked at her with compassion. "Leah, do you see the potter? He uses the hot fire of the kiln to make the pottery strong and radiant. Your patience and faith are also being tested in the furnace of this world to become more precious in the sight of the Father in heaven." 8. This life is an imperfect field, not the final kingdom of heaven. Understanding this helps us avoid disillusionment and disappointment. Do not expect a perfect world right now, but strive to make it better every day, and place your absolute hope in the final harvest when the kingdom of God is fully manifested. The Apostle Thomas, after a tiring preaching trip, said to the Lord, "Teacher, we go everywhere sowing the word of God, but evil seems not to diminish at all." Jesus pointed to the distant field. "Thomas, the sower does not stand and watch the wheat grow moment by moment, but he trusts that there will be a harvest. We are sowing the seeds of the kingdom of heaven in a field that is not yet heaven. You must remain faithful in sowing, for the Father's harvest will surely come." 9. Children of the evil one are those who actively choose and act according to destruction, division, and deceit. These are not just people who have erred, but those who have let evil master their hearts and wills. This teaching is a serious reminder of the spiritual battle and invites us to consciously choose. Will we be children of the light, bearing the fruit of love, or will we collude with darkness, sowing death? When passing through the market, the disciples saw a money changer deliberately cheating a poor widow. John, filled with indignation, whispered, "What a wicked man." Jesus said softly to him, "That action was not born from a weak heart, but from a wicked seed that has been nurtured. He who chooses to sow the wind will surely reap the whirlwind. That is the nature of the weed." 10. Hope in the final harvest is the greatest source of strength. This is the certain promise that in the end, good will triumph completely. The fates of the wheat and the weeds are entirely different. Even if the weeds seem rampant now, the day of judgment and reward will surely come. The wheat will be gathered into the barn, and the weeds will be burned. This hope gives meaning to every struggle and assures us of a glorious victory. At dusk, Jesus and the disciples looked out over the fields of Galilee. Matthew, who had been a despised tax collector, quietly asked, "Teacher, can someone who was once a weed like me truly enter the Father's barn?" Jesus smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Matthew, when you let the owner of the field touch and transform you, you are no longer a weed. You have become good wheat, and my Father never loses a single precious grain of his wheat." Before we continue our journey of discovery today, please subscribe to the channel if you truly want to hear the teachings of Jesus Christ to change this life. Thank you, and you are invited to continue with the program. 11. The spread of evil often happens in silence, like the roots of weeds creeping underground. Evil does not always manifest in violent actions. Sometimes it is just a word that sows doubt, a pessimistic attitude that discourages others, or a small compromise with dishonesty. They spread silently, suffocating the life of goodness without us knowing. One day, the disciples gathered and heard news that one of their group had spoken ill of their teacher. They were furious, but Jesus said, "Do not rush to find out who said it. See that word as a small weed root. It grows underground, creeping from one person to another. Instead of searching for the root, tend to your own soil, making it fertile with prayer and trust. so the weed's root has no place to grip. 12. Each human soul is a miniature field. The battle between wheat and weeds does not only happen in the outside world, but also wages fiercely right within our own hearts. Every day, we must choose which seed to cultivate, the seed of love and forgiveness, or the seed of hatred and anger. A young man came to Jesus and confessed, "Teacher, my heart is full of conflict. I want to do good, but evil thoughts keep rising up." Jesus replied, "Your heart is a field where my Father has sown good seed, but the enemy does not rest either. Every day, when you choose forgiveness over resentment, when you choose humility over pride, that is when you are pulling up a weed and watering your wheat." 13. The initial foundation is extremely important. One must actively sow and receive good seed. To become good wheat, we must first be sown from good seed. That means knowing how to choose what we allow into our souls, the Word of God, healthy thoughts, loving actions. Do not let your soul become a wasteland where any seed from the world can fall. The people asked the Lord, "Teacher, how can we be sure we are good wheat?" He answered, "A wise farmer chooses the plumpest seeds to sow. You too must let my word be the seed for your lives. Listen, reflect, and put it into practice. When you do that, you are sowing in your hearts the best seed from the Father's barn. 14. Spiritual slumber is the very opportunity for the enemy to act. The parable says, while everyone was sleeping, the enemy came to sow weeds. That slumber is a state of negligence, lack of vigilance, and coldness in the life of faith. When we stop praying, stop learning, and stop doing good deeds, that is when we open the door for evil to creep in. After a day of preaching, the disciples were all tired and wanted to rest. Jesus took them to a quiet place and said, "Stay awake and pray." Peter wondered, "Why must we pray now?" Jesus replied, "The time when the field guard is most tired is also the time the thief is most likely to enter. The enemy of your souls never sleeps. He only waits for the moment you are most tired and negligent to sow his weeds." 15. Do not waste your energy on the weeds. If a gardener keeps staring at and getting angry about the weeds, he will have no time left to care for his flower beds. Similarly, if we keep focusing on bad things, on negative people, we will deplete our own energy and joy for life, forgetting the task of making our souls bloom and bear fruit. The Apostle Philip was very troubled by the hypocrisy of some scribes and frequently complained about it. Jesus said to him, "Philip, do not spend your whole day counting the weeds in another's field. Spend that time turning toward the sun, so the wheat within you may be filled with light and bear fruit." 16. The harvest is not just the end, but also the revelation of true nature. Under the harvest sun, the wheat will turn golden, heavy with grain, while the weeds will reveal their dryness and worthlessness. The day of judgment is the same. It is not an arbitrary punishment, but the moment when the true nature of each person, long hidden, will be exposed to the light. A child asked Jesus, "What does the harvest look like?" He stroked the child's head and said, "Then in the light of my Father, the wheat plants will shine with a golden radiance because of the seeds of love within them. As for the weeds, though they look tall, they are empty inside, and they will be ashamed of their own emptiness. It is the day of truth." 17. The community of believers is a field where we grow together. We are not wheat plants that grow alone. We grow in a community, a shared field, We rely on each other to withstand storms, and we must also learn to patiently endure the presence of weeds right within our community and pray for them. A group of believers in Capernaum was arguing because a member of the group had sinned publicly, setting a bad example for many. They wanted to expel that person. When Jesus heard this, he said, "Do you see the wheat in the field? They stand close together to protect one another. Do not be quick to break a stalk of wheat that seems weak. Embrace and support it, for you are all in the same field until the harvest." 18. Evil does not create on its own. It only imitates and destroys on the foundation of goodness. The enemy does not create a separate field for his weeds. He seeks out the fertile field that God has established to sow his destruction. This shows that evil, by its nature, is a parasite. It has no life of its own, but must cling to the life of goodness to exist and destroy. The Apostle Jude, not Iscariot, asked the Lord, "Teacher, why doesn't the evil one create his own world instead of interfering in the Father's world?" Jesus explained, "Because darkness cannot create light. It can only seek to obscure the light that already exists. Evil is an absence of good, a void that wants to fill itself by destroying what is beautiful." 19. Discernment requires the light of God, not the eyes of mortals. Only God can see to the very roots. We humans are often deceived by outward appearances. A person who seems pious may carry an arrogant heart, while a person considered a sinner may be quietly repenting. Therefore, our judgments are always partial and dangerous. The Apostle Bartholomew pointed to a man with a solemn, devout appearance and praised him. Jesus said, "Bartholomew, you see the green leaves, but God sees where the roots are drawing nutrients from. There are roots that drink from the living water of humility, but there are also roots that drink from the stagnant pool of self-satisfaction. Wait and see its fruit." 20. Free will is the deep root of the problem. Why does the Almighty God allow the enemy to act? Because he respects the freedom he has given his creatures. He desires children who voluntarily choose to be good wheat, not puppets forced to be good. A harvest of love can only grow in the soil of freedom. A Greek philosopher came to challenge Jesus. "If your God is all-powerful, why does he allow an enemy to exist and destroy his work?" Jesus replied, "Because the owner of the field wants children who choose to love him, not slaves who only know how to obey. Love cannot sprout without the freedom to choose. Even the wrong choice is part of that freedom." 21. Fruit is the ultimate and undeniable proof. In the end, all words, all outward appearances, become meaningless. Only the fruit, meaning the actions, the concrete results in life, can prove the true nature of a tree. A life of love, joy, peace, and patience is the fruit of good wheat. The disciples were arguing about a visiting preacher from afar, not knowing if he was a man of God. Jesus told them simply, "Do not rush to believe their words. Look at their deeds. A wheat plant gives rice to feed people, while a weed only produces bitter seeds that no one can eat. By their fruits you will know them." 22. The presence of weeds does not diminish the value of the wheat. Even if the field is full of weeds, the preciousness of a single golden stalk of wheat does not diminish in the eyes of the owner. Likewise, even if the world is full of sin, the value of one righteous soul is still priceless in the sight of God. Mary Magdalene felt discouraged seeing so much evil around her. Jesus picked up a grain of wheat and said, "Mary, even if this grain was the only one left in a field full of weeds, the owner of the field would still consider it a treasure and deem the entire harvest worthwhile because of it." 23. Evil carries within itself the seed of self-destruction. The fate of the weeds is to be thrown into the fire. This carries a deep meaning. Evil, because it opposes the order of life and love, is inherently unsustainable and will ultimately lead to its own destruction. Fire is the symbol of the inevitable end for things that have no eternal value. A Roman centurion mocked Jesus' teaching about love, claiming that only power and force endure. Jesus pointed to a fire burning thorns and rubbish. Caesar's power is like that fire. It flares up brightly, but will also die down, leaving only ashes. But the kingdom of heaven is like that grain of wheat. It looks small but contains life and will feed humanity for generations. 24. True faith is absolute trust in the wisdom of the owner of the field. Faith is not about trying to understand exactly why there are weeds, why there is evil. Faith is trusting that the owner of the field knows exactly what he is doing, that his plan is beyond our understanding, and that he will bring about a good result in the end. Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, his heart full of worries. "Rabbi, I cannot reconcile the existence of suffering with a benevolent God." Jesus replied, "Nicodemus, does a servant question every decision of his master? A faithful servant trusts that his master knows the right season for planting, the reason for his patience, and the exact time for the harvest." 25. The final separation is an act of love. Gathering the wheat into the barn is not just an act of reward, but also an act of protection. God separates the righteous from evil to protect them forever from all influence and the presence of sin and suffering. It is an act of love that brings them to a place of absolute safety. A mother whose righteous son was killed by robbers tearfully asked the Lord, "Is my son at peace, teacher?" Jesus comforted her, "Madam, your son is a golden grain of wheat that has ripened and been gathered into the Father's barn. In that place no weed of wickedness, no insect of sorrow can ever touch him again. That is true peace." 26. The harvesters are the angels, because the work of judgment requires absolute perfection. Humans, no matter how holy, cannot carry out the final discernment. That task is too delicate and important. It requires an infallible insight, so it is entrusted to the messengers of God. This reminds us of our own limitations in judging others. With great zeal, Peter declared, "Lord, when your kingdom comes, I will help you clear out all the wicked people." Jesus looked at him kindly. "Peter, your hands were made for casting nets to save people, not for pulling weeds to harm people. The final judgment belongs to the angels, those who can see into the heart without harming even a single young stalk of wheat." 27. Fire is the symbol of a final and irreversible end. Fire not only purifies, but also destroys what is worthless. It represents the inevitable consequence of freely choosing a life apart from God, apart from the source of life. It is the complete disappearance of all that is false, hateful, and corrupt. One evening, as people were gathered around a fire for warmth, Jesus said, "This fire gives us warmth and light. But there will be a fire that does not warm, but only burns. All that is weed, all that is deceit, all that is selfish will be thrown into it, as people throw dry grass into a furnace." 28. The glorious destiny of the righteous is to shine like the sun. This is one of the most beautiful and hopeful images. The destination of the wheat is not just safety, but glorious splendor in the Father's kingdom. The goodness, humility, and silence in this life will be transformed into a dazzling and eternal glory. A little girl asked Jesus, "Is it beautiful in heaven?" Jesus smiled and picked her up. "More beautiful than you can ever imagine, my daughter. Here, the good wheat must crowd together with the weeds. But in my Father's kingdom, all who love him will shine brightly like suns, and there will be no shadows left." 29. The call. "Whoever has ears, let them hear," is an invitation to listen with the heart. This parable is not a story for entertainment, but a spiritual truth. To understand it, one needs not only ears to hear the sound, but an open heart, a mind that thirsts for truth. Many hear, but do not understand, because their hearts have hardened like rocky ground. After telling the parable to the crowd, Jesus saw many looked confused and walked away. He turned to speak privately to the disciples. "I use parables to speak to them, because the seed of my word only sprouts in the soil of a soul that has been tilled. Many have ears to hear the sound, but not hearts to listen. But you have been given to understand the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven." 30. The ultimate purpose of the parable is to be a mirror for each person to examine themselves. After hearing and reflecting on it all, the most important question is not, "Who is the weed?" but "Am I wheat or a weed?" This parable is an urgent invitation for each of us to examine our lives, our choices, our thoughts, and our actions, and to ask ourselves, what fruit am I bearing for the owner of my field? As evening fell on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, after a long day of teaching, Jesus sat quietly with his disciples. The air was still. Finally, Andrew spoke, a question that seemed to come from the hearts of everyone. "Lord, teach us how to be sure that we are the Father's good wheat." Before we continue our journey of discovery today, please subscribe to the channel if you truly want to hear the teachings of Jesus Christ to change this life. Thank you, and you are invited to continue with the program. 31. The enemy is a real and active spiritual force, not just a metaphor for human weakness. Recognizing that a real enemy is actively sowing evil is the first step in spiritual defense. If we only see evil as a product of human nature, we will lose the necessary vigilance against its subtle temptations and schemes. A learned disciple who had followed the Sadducees said to the Lord, "Teacher, perhaps the enemy you speak of is just the evil desires within our hearts." Jesus replied, "When a shepherd guards his flock, he doesn't just worry about the wolf nature inside each sheep. He watches for the real wolf prowling outside the fence. You too must guard your hearts and also stay alert to the real enemy who wants to devour you." 32. The field is the whole world, not just the community of believers. God's love and patience are not limited to any one group of people. He sows his good seed everywhere, and the sunlight of his grace also shines on all people, regardless of race or religion. This invites us to have a broader view of God's mercy. The Apostle James suggested they should only preach to the Jews. Jesus then pointed to the marketplace, where Romans, Greeks, and other peoples were passing by. He said, "The owner's field is this whole world. My Father's sun and rain do not refuse any piece of land. Do not build fences yourselves to divide his field." 33. Spiritual growth is often silent, slow, and invisible, like a seed sprouting underground. Do not be discouraged if you do not see spectacular results immediately in your faith life. Holiness is not a sprint. It is a process of persistent growth. Trust that God is still working in you, even when you cannot feel it. A young disciple came to lament to the Lord, "Teacher, I have followed you for many months, but I don't feel I am any better." Jesus asked him, "Does a farmer dig up the seed every day to see if it has grown roots? No, he trusts the soil, the water, and the sun. Your soul is also growing roots in the darkness, where only the Father in heaven sees. Be patient." 34. Weeds also draw nutrients from the soil, depleting resources meant for the good. The presence of evil is not just harmless. It consumes precious resources, time, energy, peace, joy. A bad word can drain trust. A selfish act can diminish the love in a family. A family came to Jesus because the slander of a relative had torn them apart. Jesus said, "The weed of discord has sucked dry the stream of peace in your home." That is the price paid for letting evil take root. 35. Sometimes we love the very weeds in our lives. The greatest danger is when we become attached to the weeds. Bad habits, toxic relationships, sinful comforts. We find them beautiful, they bring temporary comfort, and we are reluctant to give them up, even knowing they are suffocating the wheat of our soul. The rich young man asked Jesus what he must do to have eternal life. Jesus told him to sell all his possessions. He went away sad. Jesus turned to the disciples and said, "For him, wealth has become a beautiful kind of weed. He loved looking at it so much that he could not bear the sight of the field being cleared for the real harvest." 36. The kingdom of heaven is not just a future destination, but a reality growing right now. The kingdom of heaven has already begun to be present silently, like wheat growing in the field of life. We are invited to live as citizens of that kingdom starting today, through actions of love, forgiveness, and justice. A member of the Zealot group asked Jesus when he would use his power to establish his kingdom. Jesus replied, "The kingdom of heaven does not come with noise. It is already here, growing quietly in the heart that knows how to love, in the hand that knows how to give, in the soul that knows how to forgive. It is like yeast in the dough, like a mustard seed in the garden." 37. We must distinguish clearly between sinners and weeds. All wheat plants get sick or dirty at times. A sinner who repents, a good person who stumbles, is like a wheat plant that is weakened but is still fundamentally wheat. That is completely different from a weed, which has a nature that lives and sows destruction. After denying the teacher, Peter wept bitterly. He felt he was a weed. But the resurrected Jesus appeared to him, not to condemn, but to ask, "Do you love me?" He showed that a wheat stalk that has fallen is not the same as a weed. His repentance was proof that his nature was still wheat. 38. Every era has its own kind of weeds that take different forms. The specific manifestations of evil may change with culture and time, but its essence, pride, selfishness, falsehood, does not change. Our task is to learn to recognize the root of evil in all the forms it disguises itself. The disciples were worried about persecution from the Roman Empire. Jesus told them, "Today, the weed wears the face of Caesar's power. In other times, it will wear the face of insatiable greed, of indifference, or of arrogant knowledge. Do not just look at its face. Learn to recognize the root of the enemy." 39. The truth does not need to be loud. The wheat plant grows in silence, while weeds can grow very quickly and wildly. True holiness often lies in quiet, faithful actions, not in loud declarations or attention-grabbing behaviors. The disciples were impressed by an orator in the market who was attracting a crowd with strong words. Jesus, however, pointed out to them a poor widow who was quietly putting 2 small coins into the offering box. Her faith is a silent but heavy grain of wheat. The other man's words are just the rustling of dry grass in the wind. 40. The paradox of weakness. Humility is strength. The wheat plant must bend in the storm to avoid breaking, while the rigid weed can be uprooted. In spiritual life, humility, flexibility, and adaptability are in fact the strengths to survive and grow. Thomas expressed admiration for a scribe famous for his rigidity in keeping the law. Jesus told them a short parable about a great oak tree that was toppled by a storm, and a fragile reed that knew how to bend with the wind and thus survived. He concluded, "The kingdom of heaven belongs to the reeds that know how to humble themselves, not to the arrogant oaks of this world." 41. Waiting is an active, not a passive action. The command, "Let both grow together," is not an act of resignation. It is an active state of faith, requiring prayer, vigilance, and personal growth while trusting in God's timing. Martha was impatient, wanting God to punish those who had harmed her family. She wanted justice to be served immediately. Jesus said to her, "Martha, a farmer waiting for the harvest does not sit still. He still tends the garden, sharpens his sickle, and trusts in the sun. Your waiting must be active like that." 42. A weed can never produce wheat. The nature of a thing determines its fruit. A life rooted in deceit and selfishness can never produce the true fruits of the Spirit, which are love, joy, and peace. It can only create counterfeit products, which look similar but have no value. A rich but fraudulent merchant donated a large sum of money to the temple to gain a good reputation. The disciples were impressed. Jesus said, "Can a thorn bush bear figs? His offering is a fruit, but it grows from the root of pride, not the root of generosity. God is not deceived by the appearance of the fruit." 43. The disciples' responsibility is to sow the seed. Making it grow belongs to God. As followers of Christ, we are also invited to become sowers of the good seed, which is the gospel. But we are not responsible for the results. Our duty is to sow faithfully. Whether the seed grows or not, and what the final harvest will be, is the owner's business. The disciples returned from a preaching trip, some feeling discouraged because few people had listened. Jesus told them, "Your task is only to sow the seed. Some falls on rock, some falls among thorns. Do not worry. It is the owner of the field himself who makes the seed grow." 44. The field was bought at a very high price. This world, where wheat and weeds grow together, was redeemed by Christ himself with his own blood. He considered the wheat in it so precious that he sacrificed everything to buy the whole field, accepting the weeds along with it. A disciple asked why God cared so much about a world so full of sin. Jesus answered with the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. The Son of Man is also like that man. For the joy of finding the treasure, which is the righteous souls, he sold all he had to buy that entire field. 45. The most dangerous weed is the one that believes it is wheat. The most subtle and dangerous form of evil is when it completely believes in its own righteousness. When evil acts in the name of good, it causes the most severe damage without even knowing it. A group of scribes confronted Jesus, accusing him of breaking the Sabbath. They genuinely believed they were protecting God's law. After they left, Jesus said to the disciples, "The most difficult weed to deal with is the one that believes it is the most perfect stalk of wheat in the field." 46. Truth liberates, while falsehood binds. The wheat stalk reaches straight for the light, free and strong. Weeds often grow intertwined, wrapping around and suffocating the wheat. Living in truth leads to inner freedom. Living in sin and deceit leads to slavery. A man bound by debt and lies came to the Lord. After talking with him, Jesus turned to the crowd. "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This man has been tightly bound by the roots of deceitful weeds. Only the light of truth can show him the way out." 47. Sometimes the righteous feel lonely. Living an upright life can make a person feel isolated, like a lone stalk of wheat in a dense patch of weeds. That is part of the test, but also an opportunity to root oneself more deeply in God. A young man named Stephen told the disciples that he felt lonely in his village because his faith was mocked. Peter, remembering the teacher's words, comforted him. "Even if you feel alone, remember that you are part of a great field that the owner is always watching, and the best stalks of wheat are often those that have grown strong despite the weeds around them." 48. The beauty of ordinariness. The parable uses the image of wheat, a familiar and essential food crop, not some exotic flower. This shows that holiness is found in the simple, faithful, and diligent life of every day, not just in extraordinary, great deeds. People were marveling at an ascetic who performed strange acts of self-mortification. They asked Jesus if that was the path to holiness. Jesus, however, pointed to a woman kneading dough to make bread for her family. "The kingdom of heaven is like that," he said. "It is the daily bread, the silent faithfulness, the simple love. That is the true wheat." 49. The destination is the Father's kingdom, a place of kinship. The final destination of the wheat is called their Father's kingdom. This emphasizes a familial, intimate relationship. We are not just products being harvested, but children returning to our Father's home. Jesus was talking to the disciples about the end times. Their faces showed fear. He smiled. "Do not be afraid. When the wheat is gathered, where is it taken? Into the owner's barn. You are not going to a strange place. You are returning home to your own Father." 50. This parable has no ending until the harvest day. This story is still ongoing, and we are living right in that period of growth. The final chapter of our lives has not yet been written. Each day that passes is an opportunity for us to choose whether we will be a grain-laden stalk of wheat or a useless weed. As the sun set, a disciple asked Jesus, "Teacher, so how does the story end?" Jesus looked out at the fields turning golden in the dusk and said, "It has not ended. It is happening. You and everyone are writing the ending for your own lives right now. Write it well." Before we continue our journey of discovery today, please subscribe to the channel if you truly want to hear the teachings of Jesus Christ to change this life. Thank you, and you are invited to continue with the program. 51. Weeds also crave the sun, but in a distorted way. No creature is born to love darkness. Evil is often the distortion, the perversion of a good desire. The desire to be recognized, to be safe, to be loved is legitimate. But when people seek those things through selfish, deceitful paths, separate from God, then that good desire nurtures toxic weeds. On the road to Jericho, Jesus and the disciples passed a tax booth. A tax collector named Levi, a man with a self-satisfied and wealthy appearance, invited Jesus to stop. He bragged about his newly built house and his prosperity. Seeing the disciples' discomfort, Levi spoke directly to Jesus. "Rabbi, many despise me, but I do all these things only to seek security for my family, so my children will not have to suffer. Is that a bad desire?" Jesus looked deep into his eyes. "Levi, the desire for a sturdy home is a good thing, just as every plant craves the sun. But there are plants that rise by sucking all the water from the plant next to it, blocking the light from others. They also receive the sunlight. But the price is the barrenness of the whole garden. The security you seek is built on the tears of many others. That is the security of a weed. Seek the light that warms everyone, and then you will find true security in my Father's kingdom." 52. God's patience is an invitation to repentance, not a tolerance of sin. Many mistake God's silence in the face of evil for agreement. But the truth is the opposite. Every day that passes without justice being executed is a day of grace, an extra opportunity given for the sinner to repent and turn back. To waste that precious time is to choose the fate of the weed for oneself. In a corner of the market at Magdala, a promiscuous woman was mocking those who followed the Lord. She said to the Apostle Peter, "You keep talking about God's punishment. Look at me. I'm still living happily, still beautiful. If your God was really bothered, he would have struck me with lightning long ago." Peter sadly recounted the story to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and told a longer story. A vineyard owner had a precious fig tree planted in his vineyard. For 3 years he came looking for fruit on it, but found none. He intended to cut it down, but the gardener pleaded, "Sir, leave it for 1 more year. I will dig around it and fertilize it. Maybe next year it will bear fruit. If not, then you can cut it down." That woman is that fig tree. My Father, the owner of the garden, is still patiently tending to her through every event, every encounter. His patience is not neglect, but a loving effort to save. But he will not tend it forever. 53. The land itself also plays an important role in how plants grow. The condition of the soil, meaning the heart, the family, or an entire culture, profoundly affects the growth of both wheat and weeds. A culture that worships money and power will create conditions for the weeds of greed to grow rampant. A heart tilled by humility and prayer will be good soil for the wheat to blossom. Jesus and the disciples passed through the city of Tiberias, a place heavily influenced by Rome. They saw luxurious villas next to wretched slums. The disciples commented on the injustice and public sin there. Jesus stopped, pointed at the magnificent buildings, and said, "Do you see where the weeds grow most abundantly? It is in the most fertile soil. The soil of this city is fertilized with pride, watered with desire, and exposed to the sunlight of indifference. In that soil, the seed of humility can hardly sprout, but the seeds of cruelty and depravity grow quickly. Before blaming the weeds, look at the soil that nurtured them." 54. Evil often promises an attractive shortcut. The temptation of becoming a weed lies in the fact that it seems an easier and faster way to get what one wants. It does not require the patience, the hard cultivation of the wheat. It only requires cunning, trampling, and selfishness to rise. A young farmer named Jonah was restless. The harvest was poor, and he was tempted to mix chaff and small pebbles into the good sacks of wheat to sell for more money. His conscience troubled him, and he sought out Jesus when he passed through the village. Jesus did not answer immediately, but walked with him out to the wheat field. He said, "Jonah, look. To get these plump grains, how long did you have to wait? You plowed, sowed, weeded, and entrusted it to the sun and rain of heaven. That is the long road of honesty. The road you are thinking of is very short. It's finished in one night. But the long road gives you a real harvest and a clean name. The short road gives you a heavier purse, but also the name of a cheat and a harvest of shame. Which road will you choose?" 55. For the wheat, the harvest is also a liberation. The harvest is not just a judgment for the weeds. For the wheat, it is a glorious liberation. It is the moment that ends the exhausting struggle of coexisting with evil, ends the fear of being squeezed and overshadowed. It is the moment of complete peace. An old man named Simeon, who had lived a righteous life and witnessed too much evil, came to Jesus. His voice was tired. "Rabbi, I have tried to live faithfully to the covenant, but I am so tired of seeing thorny and unjust things every day." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder and said in a warm voice, "Simeon, do you see the harvester? When the wheat is golden ripe, he does not use the sickle to destroy, but gently supports the heavy stalk, cuts it from the stem, and frees it from the weeds clinging at its feet. The harvest day of my Father is the same. It is not a day of fear for the righteous, but a day of liberation, a day when the owner of the field will personally embrace each of his precious stalks of wheat, bringing them to the barn, where no weed can ever bother them again." 56. The existence of weeds is a reminder that we must depend completely on God. We cannot defeat evil by our own strength. The seemingly overwhelming presence of evil is not meant to push us into despair or self-righteous heroism, but to impel us to run to God in humility and surrender. The disciples had just returned from a successful preaching trip. They excitedly recounted how they had cast out demons and healed the sick. In his excitement, James said loudly, "Teacher, with the power you have given us, we will sweep all evil from this land of Judea." Jesus noticed the self-satisfaction in their words. He then told a story. There was a very brave sheepdog. One night, seeing a pack of wolves approach, it thought it could drive the whole pack away by itself. It charged out and fought bravely, but was eventually surrounded by the pack and nearly exhausted. Just then, the shepherd appeared, and with just his staff and his voice, he made the whole pack flee. "My sons, you are brave dogs, but never forget who the shepherd is. Your strength comes from him, and the final victory also belongs to him." 57. Weeds love complexity, while wheat lives in simplicity. Evil often creates complicated situations, plots, unnecessary drama. It likes meticulous rules, convoluted arguments. In contrast, the nature of wheat is extremely simple. It only needs the basic things, light, water, and soil, to grow. True holiness lies in the simplicity of a loving heart. The Pharisees and Herodians trapped Jesus with a complex legal question about paying taxes to Caesar. After he gave his wise answer that silenced them, he spoke privately to the disciples. Notice how deceit always loves to hide in the thickets of complexity, in the traps of legalism. It's like weeds growing in a dense, tangled bush. But the truth of the kingdom of heaven is as simple as a grain of wheat. so simple that even a child can understand it. Love God and love your neighbor. That is all. 58. The shadow of the weeds can stunt the wheat, making it grow slowly. The influence of evil is not just parallel coexistence. It can actively harm the development of good. Living in a toxic environment, a quarrelsome family, a dishonest workplace, can weaken faith, erode hope, and make love grow cold. Jesus visited a family in Bethany whom he loved. But the atmosphere in the house was very heavy. 2 brothers in the house were in a prolonged dispute over inheritance. The bitterness had made their prayers dry up. Jesus sat down between them and said, "I see your home as a small field. Before, the wheat grew very well. But then a weed of discord grew up. It grew tall and cast a very large shadow. That shadow of resentment is blocking the light of my Father, preventing the surrounding wheat of love from receiving enough warmth to bear fruit. You must uproot it together, or the whole field will soon become barren." 59. The entire history of salvation is the story of the owner of the field caring for his field. From the time of Adam, through the patriarchs, the prophets, and to the very presence of Jesus Christ, God has always been patiently working on his worldly field. He sent workers, warned about the weeds, cultivated the wheat, and prepared everything for the final harvest. While on a hill overlooking the vast fields, Jesus taught the disciples a history lesson. See the history of Israel as the story of this field. Abraham was the one who first cleared the land. Moses was the one who drove the stakes, fencing it with the law. The prophets were the watchmen, constantly shouting warnings when they saw the enemy secretly sowing weeds. And now the son of the owner of the field has come, not to watch from a distance, but to walk into the midst of the field, to touch every stalk of wheat, and to sow a new seed, the seed of his own life, before the final harvest begins. 60. A weed cannot turn itself into wheat, but the owner of the field can. The transformation from a sinful life to a holy life is not the result of human effort. It is a miracle of grace. Humans cannot change their own nature, but God, the owner of the field, can pull up a plant from bad soil and replant it in his good soil. Zacchaeus, after meeting the Lord, became a completely different person. A few weeks later, he sought out Jesus again, his heart still amazed at his own change. "Teacher, I was the worst kind of weed, only knowing how to suck the life from this land. How could I change?" Jesus smiled. "Zacchaeus, a plant cannot change its own nature. A thorn bush cannot bear grapes on its own. But the owner of the field, with his love, can do something more miraculous. He doesn't just pull out the weeds. He can take a branch from a wild tree and graft it onto his true vine. My Father's grace has grafted you into my very life. You are no longer a weed." 61. The barn is not a static place of storage, but a place of abundant life. Being gathered into the barn is not the end of a journey, but the beginning of fulfilling an ultimate purpose. Wheat is gathered into the barn to become bread on the Master's table. The righteous who enter the kingdom of heaven are to share in the endless life and joy of God. The disciples were discussing the afterlife. Some imagined it as a place of eternal rest, with nothing left to do. Jesus overheard and said, "What do you think the owner gathers the wheat into the barn for? To look at it forever? No, he gathers the wheat to grind into flour, knead into bread, and serve at the feast. My Father's barn is not a place of quiet rest, but a banquet hall roaring with joy, where the grains of wheat, that is you, will become the bread of life, sharing the endless joy in his house. 62. Every stalk of wheat has its own name in the owner's heart. To the owner of the field, the harvest is not an anonymous mass of produce. He knows every single stalk of wheat, knows how it struggled with the rocks, how it rose from the darkness, what storms it patiently endured. Every soul is unique and precious to him. A little girl named Salome was helping her father in the wheat field. She felt so small and meaningless in the vast field. When she saw Jesus passing by, she timidly asked, "Teacher, among these millions of wheat stalks, does God see me?" Jesus sat down beside her, pulled up a stalk of wheat and said, "Salome, look at this. An ordinary farmer might just see this as a stalk of wheat, but the great owner of the field in heaven not only sees it, but he knows its name. He knows what day it was sown, how many drops of dew it has drunk, how many rays of sun it has received. And he rejoices over every small grain on this ear. You are the same. You are never anonymous in the eyes of the Father in heaven." 63. Weeds also share the rain and sun. That is the mystery of common grace. God gives the blessings of nature, light, air, rain, to everyone, both the good and the evil. This is not a sign of weakness or injustice, but an expression of boundless love and generosity, a love that always gives without calculating, always invites without forcing. A long drought had just ended in Galilee. When the first rain fell, everyone rejoiced. But Simon the Zealot grumbled when he saw the rain was also watering the fields of a notoriously cruel Roman landowner. Jesus heard him and said, "Simon, you can hold an umbrella so the rain doesn't wet you, but can you command the rain not to fall on the land of the one you dislike? My Father's love is like this rain and this sun. It is given to all without discrimination. It gives life and gives opportunity. It is a swolent invitation for both the righteous and the sinner to look up and see where those blessings come from." 64. Judgment always begins with self-judgment. Before looking for the weeds in the world, this parable forces us to look at the weeds growing in the garden of our own souls: pride, envy, laziness, judgment. The real battle always begins within. At the Last Supper, Peter strongly declared that even if everyone else fell away, he never would. But then he denied the teacher 3 times. After the resurrection, Jesus met him again by the lake. The dialogue, "Do you love me?" was not an interrogation, but a gentle way for Jesus to lead Peter to look into the field of his own heart. He helped him realize how tall the weed of self-satisfaction had grown, and invited him to pull it out in humility so that love could grow again. 65. Weeds are often very united in their destructive purpose. It is a paradox that good people can be divided over trivial matters, while the forces of evil can easily unite when they share a common goal of opposing good. Jesus observed that the Pharisees and the Herodians, 2 groups that hated each other politically, joined hands to find a way to trap and harm him. He pointed this out to the disciples. "Look, the thorn bush and the thistle are 2 different types, but they are willing to weave together to form a barrier, choking the vine. The children of darkness are often wiser in their own way than the children of light. They know how to unite for hatred, while you are sometimes divided by pride." 66. Time will expose the true nature. When they first sprout, the wheat plant and the weed, tares, look almost identical. Only over time, as they grow and mature, does the difference become clear. This teaches us that discernment requires patience and observation. One cannot rush to a conclusion based only on the initial appearance. A very zealous and articulate follower had just joined the group. All the disciples, except Jesus, were very impressed and admired him. John privately asked Jesus why he seemed reserved. Jesus replied, "John, when the plants are young, only the experienced field owner can tell the difference. But be patient. Let them grow together. Time is the ally of truth. The sun that ripens the wheat to gold is the same sun that withers the weed. Wait and see its fruit." It's 67. The danger of good soil left fallow. A soul blessed with many gifts, intelligence, health, talent, if not carefully cultivated with humility and gratitude, can become the place where the most monstrous and dangerous weeds grow. The sin of a person with great potential is always more destructive. When speaking of Judas, Jesus' voice was not just judgmental, but full of sorrow. He explained to the other disciples, "Judas was given very good soil. He walked with me, saw the miracles, heard the sermons, but he allowed a small seed of greed to fall into that soil and did not pull it out when it was still a seedling. Because his soil was fertile, the weed of betrayal grew up far stronger and more toxic than if it had grown on the dry ground of ignorance." 68. The harvest is an event of cosmic proportions. The final judgment is not a small, local event. It involves both heaven and earth, the angels, and all of humanity from all ages. It is the climax and the conclusion of all human history, where all things will be brought to light. On a clear night, Jesus led the disciples up a hill. He pointed to the starry sky and said, "The field is much larger than you think. It is not just this land of Judea. It is all that you see and do not see. And when the harvest comes, my Father's angels will be sent not only to this region, but to every corner of creation, to the very ends of time. It will be the great sorting of all that has ever lived." 69. The joy of the harvest must be the focus of hope. The parable ends with destruction for the weeds, but for the righteous, the focus is the joy of being gathered. The dominant feeling of a believer when thinking about the end times should not be fear of punishment, but the joyful anticipation of a child about to go home, of a tired worker about to feast with his master. Jesus told the disciples a longer version of the harvest story, but this time he focused not on the fire, but on the feast after the wheat was safe in the barn. He described the music, the food, the laughter of the master and the servants, the feeling of relief after a long, hard season. "This," he said to his anxious disciples, "is what the kingdom of heaven is like for you. It is a banquet." 70. God's silence is patience in action. When God seems silent in the face of rampant evil, it is not indifference or impotence. It is the deliberate waiting of the wise farmer who knows exactly the best time to act, and he refuses to risk harming the wheat for the sake of a premature, hasty harvest. A man whose only child was gravely ill ran to Jesus crying, "Why does God let this happen? Why is he sullen when my child is in pain?" Jesus did not answer immediately. He just sat down with the man in silence, sharing his pain for a long time. Then he said gently, "A farmer is never more attentive than when he is quietly watching his precious field of wheat grow, waiting for the perfect moment to act. His silence is not abandonment. It is deep and loving concern. Now let us pray together to that Father who is silently watching." 71. Forgiveness does not cancel the harvest, but it completely changes the plant's fate in the harvest. God's grace does not mean there will be no day of judgment. That day will surely come. But the miracle of forgiveness is that it changes our nature before the owner of the field. When forgiven, a person is no longer defined by their sinful past. They are counted as wheat, not because they were never weeds, but because the Lord's love transformed them. Some time after Jesus saved her from being stoned, the woman caught in adultery was still living under the scorn of the villagers. She found Jesus by Jacob's well, her face etched with sorrow. "Teacher," she said softly, "you forgave me, but my past seems to still be there. Everyone still looks at me like a weed. On the last day, will God see me that way too?" Jesus drew a bucket of water, offered it to her, and said, "Woman, the harvest day will surely come, the day when all is clearly distinguished. But when the owner of the field sends the harvesters out, he does not ask, 'What was this plant before?' He only asks, 'What is it now?' When I told you I do not condemn you, those were the words of the owner of the field himself. That word changed your nature. Your past has been buried, and you have been reborn as wheat. Live like wheat, and do not worry about what people say about a weed that has died." 72. Weeds can never understand the language of wheat. Those who live only for themselves, for domination and destruction, will never be able to understand the logic of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. To them, the actions of the righteous are madness, weakness. Like a plant that only knows how to suck nutrients, it cannot understand why another plant would be willing for its grain to become food for others. The disciples were extremely confused and angry at the growing hatred of the high priests and scribes toward Jesus. Philip asked, "Teacher, why do they hate you so much? You only go around doing good." Jesus looked at the disciples gathered around him and explained, "Do not try to understand that hatred with the logic of love. They are two different languages. From the perspective of a weed, which only knows how to scramble to grow taller than others and choke them, a wheat plant that lives to bear heavy grain and then offer itself as bread is absurd and foolish. They don't hate me for what I do. They hate me for what I am." The very existence of wheat is an insult to the life philosophy of the weed. 73. Each stalk of wheat helps create a microclimate for the others. A strong, united, and loving community of believers can create a spiritual microclimate where faith can easily take root and grow. Conversely, a weak, divided, and cold community will create a harsh environment where young stalks of wheat are easily broken by the storms of the world. When coming to a small village near the Sea of Galilee, Jesus and the disciples noticed something special. The group of believers here, though newly formed, was very fervent and loving toward one another. They prayed together, shared their possessions, and supported the weak. Andrew remarked, "Teacher, the faith of the people here is growing so strongly." Jesus nodded and pointed to the nearby wheat field. "Look, the wheat plants growing on the outer edge, they are taller and stronger. Together they form a wall that blocks the wind. Thanks to that, the weaker, younger wheat growing inside is protected and can grow safely. Your community is the same. Your unity and love are the spiritual windbreak. When you are strong in faith, you are creating a refuge for weaker souls to grow." 74. The greatest temptation for wheat is to envy the unrestrained freedom of the weed. Weeds seem to live without rules. They grow wherever they please, chasing every desire. The wheat, bound by its nature to grow straight, to be patient, and to bear fruit, can sometimes look over and covet that so-called freedom. It doesn't realize that it is the freedom of chaos, a freedom that leads to the furnace. A young disciple who had just given up a wealthy life to follow the Lord came to him with a sad face. "Teacher," he confessed, "I am tired of the disciplines and sacrifices. I look at my old friends. They are playing, enjoying, living without a care. I feel like I'm missing out on life." Jesus did not scold him, but took him for a walk near a vineyard. He showed him the wild vines sprawling on the ground, their leaves lush but bearing only sour grapes. Then he pointed to the vines in the garden, neatly pruned, tied to trellises, looking constrained. "You see, that wild vine seems freer, but it never fulfills its purpose. But these vines, they accept the pruning of the gardener to bear sweet grapes for fine wine." True freedom is not doing everything you want, but becoming the best person God wants you to be. 75. God remembers the potential of the wheat, even when it is a weak seedling. God does not just look at our current state, with our weaknesses and shortcomings. He sees the person we can become through His grace. When He looks at a soul struggling with sin, He sees the harvest glory He intended for that soul. Mary, Martha's sister, often sat quietly at the Lord's feet. She felt so inferior compared to the other disciples, who were always strong and articulate. One day, when she was alone with the Lord, she confessed her feelings. Jesus looked at her, His eyes full of tenderness, and told a story. Mary, a gardener, was given a tiny, very ordinary-looking seed. Others laughed, but the gardener treasured it, because he knew that within that seed was the potential of a great, ancient tree. He didn't look at the rough exterior. He foresaw the shade the tree would provide and the generations of birds that would come to nest in its branches. You are the same, Mary. The Father in heaven doesn't just see a girl who is often afraid. He has already seen a great soul capable of loving Him more than all. 76. Fire is not God's revenge, but the tragic consequence of incompatibility. Fire is not a punishment created by God in anger. It is the final state of that which cannot exist in the presence of absolute love and holiness. Just as darkness cannot exist where there is light, a soul made entirely of selfishness will self-destruct when faced with a reality made entirely of love. A Stoic philosopher came to debate with Jesus, how can a God of love create a place of eternal fire? Jesus did not answer directly, but asked him back with images. Can a dry piece of straw exist in the middle of a blazing furnace? Can darkness exist right in front of the sun? Can salt water turn itself sweet when poured into a fresh spring? The fire you speak of is not something my Father sends to punish. It is the name for the tragic experience of a soul that has chosen to live in falsehood when it must finally confront the absolute truth. It cannot endure that encounter. 77. The existence of wheat is a silent judgment on the weed. The simple, faithful, and loving life of a righteous person is in itself a challenge and a judgment to the world around, even if that person never speaks a word of condemnation. Light does not need to shout to prove the existence of darkness. In a town famous for its dishonest trade, there was a carpenter named Joseph, known for his honesty. He worked hard, never overcharged, and always helped the poor. Many mocked him as a fool. A disciple asked Jesus, "Why must he endure this?" Jesus replied, "Joseph's life is like a straight line placed next to crooked lines. He doesn't need to shout that the other lines are crooked. His very straightness reveals their deceit. The light from his small lamp makes the surrounding darkness feel uncomfortable and angry." 78. Weeds have no future, but wheat has a legacy. The weed is burned and forgotten, but the wheat is different. It becomes life-giving bread, and its seed continues to be sown for new harvests. A life lived in goodness will create good influences that last forever, like ripples spreading endlessly. An old woman had lived her whole life in a small village, a quiet life of prayer and service to her family and neighbors. She felt she had done nothing great. When she met the Lord, she shared her feelings. Jesus took her hand and said, "Madam, the works of emperors carved in stone will also turn to dust, but the love you sowed in the hearts of your children and grandchildren, the kindness you gave to your neighbors, they are living seeds. They have nourished your children, and they will nourish their children. You are not a weed that will be forgotten. You are a precious grain of wheat, and your legacy is the life passed down through generations that you will never get to see." 79. Do not confuse the simplicity of the parable with the ease of the message. The parable's story is easy to understand, but its implications are extremely radical and demand a root-level change. It is not a story to be heard for pleasure, but an invitation to reorient one's entire life. Nicodemus came to see Jesus again, this time with a few members of the Sanhedrin. They discussed the parable of the weeds in a very intellectual way, as if it were a wise folk tale. Jesus challenged them directly. You discuss this story as if you are spectators looking at a field, but this parable is a mirror. It does not ask for your analysis. It demands your decision. Are you willing to be pruned, willing to be patient, willing to trust the owner of the field? Or do you find the rapid growth of the weed more appealing for your ambitions? 80. The growth of the kingdom of heaven is an unstoppable force. Despite the presence of weeds, despite setbacks and opposition, God's overall plan, the growth of the wheat, will ultimately and surely succeed. The harvest is a certainty, unshakable. The disciples were extremely discouraged and frightened after John the Baptist was beheaded by King Herod. It seemed like a resounding victory for the weeds. Jesus took them up a high mountain and spoke about the unstoppable nature of the kingdom of heaven. They can cut down a stalk of wheat, even the tallest stalk, he said, but they cannot undo the fact that the field has been sown. They cannot command the sun not to shine or the rain not to fall. My Father's kingdom is like the changing of the seasons. A late frost may harm a few buds, but summer will surely come. 81. The enemy's seed is falsehood. The foundational seed from which all weeds of evil grow is the lie that God is not good, that we are the center of the universe, that sin has no consequences. Jesus was debating with the scribes, who were deliberately twisting the meaning of the scriptures. Afterward, he explained to the disciples, the enemy's first act in the Garden of Eden was not violence, but deception. He only sowed a single seed of doubt. Did God really say, "From that one seed of falsehood, all the weeds of fear, greed, and death grew. Therefore your greatest weapon is not the sword, but the truth." 82. The maturity of wheat is measured by the weight of its grain, not the height of its stalk. True spiritual maturity is not in outward appearance, age, or knowledge. It is in the fruit, the weight of love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness in a person's character. The disciples were arguing about who was the greatest among them. Jesus led them out to a field of ripening wheat. He pointed to two stalks. One was very tall, straight, and looked impressive. The other was shorter, its stalk bent over. "Which one is better wheat?" he asked. Most pointed to the tall one. Jesus then showed them that the ear of the tall stalk was light and had few grains, while the short one was heavy, bowing down from the weight of its full grains. "In the kingdom of heaven," he said, "greatness is measured by the weight of the fruit you bear, and that often requires you to bow down in humility." 83. Weeds suck the joy out of the soil. A life sunk in sin, bitterness, and resentment not only fails to create joy for itself, but actively sucks the joy from its surroundings. Jesus entered the house of Simon the Pharisee. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with legalism, and devoid of joy. Then the sinful woman entered. Her act of love and repentance filled the room with a different spirit. Jesus pointed out the contrast to Simon. "This woman has brought the joy of a watered garden into your dry house." You see, the weed of self-satisfaction had suffocated all the joy in this place, until the humility of the wheat brought it back. 84. The silence of the good in the face of evil is also a form of slumber. The parable warns that the enemy sows weeds while everyone was sleeping. This sleep is not just physical. It can be the moral sleep of good people who see wrongdoing and do nothing, say nothing, just to keep the peace. A respected elder in the synagogue knew the treasurer was embezzling money from the poor, but he kept silent to avoid conflict. He confessed this cowardice to Jesus. Jesus said to him, "A watchman on the wall who sees the enemy coming, but remains silent because he is afraid of making noise, is no different from a watchman fast asleep. Your silence did not bring peace. It gave the darkness time to sow its seed unhindered." 85. God does not look at one's origin, but at one's current nature. It does not matter how much one lived like a weed before. If by grace, that person has been transformed, the past does not determine one's fate at the harvest. Matthew threw a party for Jesus at his house, attended by many of his old tax collector friends. A Pharisee stood outside, mocking, "He eats with sinners, with that crowd of weeds." Matthew heard this and was heartbroken. Jesus turned to him and said, "On harvest day, the farmer does not ask the grain of wheat, 'Where did you come from?' He only asks, 'Are you wheat now?' Now, Matthew, tell me, what are you today?" Matthew, with tears in his eyes, replied, "By your grace, Lord, today I am wheat." Jesus smiled. "Then that is all my Father sees." 86. Self-satisfaction is the first sign that a plant is turning into a weed. The moment a plant thinks it is the most important one in the field, it is no longer wheat. Humility and complete dependence on the owner of the field are the defining characteristics of wheat. A very devout man, who fasted and prayed regularly, told Jesus that he was certain of his place in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus told him a parable. 2 plants grew side by side. One always looked up at the sun and gave thanks for giving it life. The other always looked down at its own leaves and admired how green they were. When the harvest came, the first plant was heavy with grain. The second had only leaves and no grain. Self-satisfaction, Jesus concluded, is the surest path to worthlessness. 87. The final judgment is also an act of reordering the universe. The harvest is God's final act of bringing order to chaos, of separating what brings life from what causes death, and of restoring the original harmony he intended for creation. The disciples felt overwhelmed by the chaos of the world, political upheavals, poverty, disease. Everything seemed random and meaningless. Jesus explained the harvest as a great reordering. "Imagine an artisan's weaving studio," he said, Currently, the threads are tangled, the colors mixed, looking like a mess. The harvest is the moment the master weaver pulls every thread into its right place, revealing the beautiful tapestry he intended from the beginning. It is not an end, but a final revelation. 88. The existence of weeds makes the choice to be wheat more meaningful. In a world of only perfect goodness, doing good would be automatic. But in a world where evil exists as another choice, the free act of choosing to be good, choosing to be wheat, becomes a conscious act of love and loyalty to the owner of the field. A young man asked Jesus, "Why didn't God create a world with only wheat?" Jesus asked him back, "If a king had a son who only obeyed him because he had no other choice, is that love or just programming? The Father in heaven wants sons and daughters who see the weeds, understand their empty promises, and still freely choose to be his wheat. That choice, made in freedom, is the most beautiful harvest." 89. Do not be afraid of being contaminated by the weeds, but be afraid of being transformed into their nature. Jesus sat and ate with sinners. We are called to live in the world, but not be of the world. The danger is not being near sin, but allowing the nature of sin to soak in and transform our own hearts. The disciples were hesitant to go into a Gentile neighborhood to preach. They were afraid of being spiritually contaminated. Jesus led them straight into the center of that neighborhood. A healthy wheat plant is not afraid of the weed growing next to it, he taught. It doesn't catch a disease from the weed. The only danger is when the wheat starts to think the weed's way of life is better, and it stops drawing life from its own good roots. Do not fear their world. Fear losing your connection to the Father in heaven. 90. This parable is the ultimate promise that in the end, the owner of the field will be victorious. Despite all the efforts of the enemy, despite the power of darkness and human failures, the final outcome is not in doubt. The field belongs to the owner, and his purpose for it will surely be fulfilled. On the night before he was arrested, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the disciples were terrified. The weeds seemed to be winning completely. In his final instructions, Jesus reminded them of the parable. "This is the hour when the enemy seems to own the field," he said, his voice full of authority despite his sorrow. "He will sow his darkness, and for a moment it will cover everything. But remember my words, the harvest belongs to the owner. He will have the last word. This is not the end of the story." Thus we have traveled a long road together. A contemplative journey through 90 deep perspectives from the parable of the weeds in the wheat field that Jesus taught. We have seen that the field of the parable is not somewhere far away, but is this world, this community, and the very soul of each of us. This parable is not a map for us to find and criticize the weeds around us. On the contrary, it is a mirror that God gently places before each person, inviting us to look into it bravely and ask ourselves, what seed am I allowing to grow in the soil of my life? But perhaps the more important question Jesus wants us to ask ourselves is not a question of fear, but a question of hope. Lord, how can I become better wheat each day? How can I bear the fruits of love, forgiveness, and mercy even when I am surrounded by weeds? Because in the end, what makes us valuable is not spotless perfection, but the persistence in reaching for the light, the unwavering trust in the love and power of the good owner of the field. The harvest will surely come, and it will be a harvest of joy for those who have been his faithful wheat. In the quiet of your soul, Church Audio invites you to take a few minutes to reflect. Which contemplation among these 90 philosophies has touched you most deeply? Please share your feelings, even just a short sentence, in the comments section below. Each share from you is a good seed sown into our common field. If these contemplations have brought you a few moments of peace and enlightenment, please spread that to more people by clicking the like and share button for this video to your loved ones. And if this is your first time visiting the channel, we respectfully invite you to press the subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, so we can continue to walk together on the journey of discovering the treasure of God's Word every day. On behalf of the production team of Church Audio, we sincerely thank you for listening. We wish you always find joy and strength in the loving providence of the Supreme Owner of the field. May the peace of Christ be with you all. We respectfully say goodbye and see you again.